Last week we learned in Matthew 25 that God's people that are filled with His Spirit, show compassion to the broken and the hurting and the hungry and the oppressed. But we don't do it thoughtlessly. We don't do it haphazardly. We don't do it carelessly. We're good stewards of the gifts that He's entrusted to us. And so we carefully invest what God has invested in us to provide Him with the maximum kingdom return on investment. How many of you were here last week? Just so I can know who. Okay, awesome. A lot of you were here last week. More importantly than that, how many of you are Jesus followers? Awesome. How many of you are full of His Spirit? And thereby you know that you're full of His love and His compassion and His boldness. Could I see your hands? Awesome. How many of you are ready to change the world today? Could I just see your hands in Jesus' name? That is awesome. How many of you are still wondering if this is a pitch for a pyramid scheme? Just real, a couple. Okay, well hopefully we'll fix that. It's not. A lot of you know several years ago I prayed what I call a dangerous prayer. And I prayed that God would break my heart. And that seems like a strange thing, I think, for most people, that I would pray that God would break my heart. And I hope you don't mind, I included you in that prayer. And I should have probably asked first, but I just prayed that as a church, that God would break our hearts for what breaks His heart. And that He would help us to really see people like He sees each one of us, as being, broken and needy and lost, but also as being valuable and lovable and redeemable and worth the cost of saving. And I prayed that God would break our hearts for what He calls the least of these among us, and that by His Spirit He would call us and lead us and empower us to do something about their situations. And I think God has answered that prayer, and He's broken our hearts, and He's opened our eyes to lots of people over the last several years. He's opened our eyes and broken our hearts for the poor and the homeless. He's broken our hearts for preborn children. He's opened our eyes and broken our hearts for kids that are lost in the foster care system. He's opened our eyes and broken our hearts for veterans that are struggling physically and mentally and spiritually. He's broken our hearts for kids that are imprisoned by human trafficking. He's broken our hearts for the deaf and hard of hearing. He's broken our hearts for people that are crushed by natural disasters. He's broken our hearts for the street kids and abused women of Mombasa, where we've got Jen and Sean Nuccio over there doing incredible work. He's broken our hearts for 400 million people in India who have never heard the name Jesus. God's answered our prayer. He's broken our hearts, and He's opened our eyes. But He didn't just break our hearts, and He didn't just open our eyes. By His Spirit, He has led us, and He has empowered us, and He continues to bless us with the gifts we need to make a difference. In Acts 1:8, Jesus says something amazing to His disciples. He says, "You will be my witnesses." He is choosing them, right? He chose 12. He's choosing them. He chose these men. And He said, "You will be my witnesses here in Jerusalem, also in Judea, also in Samaria, and even to the ends of the earth." And that's been what He's been calling us and choosing us to do. And if you've ever seen our wall out there, you can't even see it today because it's covered up, but I think I got a picture of that wall out there. There it is. And these are the ministries that we feel like God has chosen us to participate in. And some of them are local, and some of them are regional, and some of them are global. And we will never go backwards on this. We will never undo what we've started with those important ministries. You know why? Because God has chosen us to be His witnesses, locally, regionally, and globally. And now God has opened my eyes, and He's broken my heart for a new people, for the poorest of the poor in Kenya, for people who live in poverty that most of us can't even imagine. And we talked a lot, and I thought a lot, and I prayed a lot about kind of how to unfold this and unpack this for you. And I tell you what I decided I'm not going to do. What I'm not going to do is spend an hour showing you really sad videos and telling you really sad stories and trying to make you feel depressed about the conditions that these people live in. You've seen poverty. You know what I'm talking about. But I do just want to say this. in my experience, I've been a pastor now for 12 years, and I've talked to a lot of you, and I've gotten to know your situations, and I've been with you through some pretty hard stuff, and I can tell you that from what I've seen, there is nothing in the human experience harder than watching your children suffer and feeling powerless to do anything about it. There's some other sad stuff in the world, but to me, there is nothing worse than seeing your kids suffer and not be able to help them. And you know how it is, right? You know what it's like when your kid didn't make the team, right? You know what it was like when your kid didn't get asked to prom. You know what it was like when you couldn't afford to buy your kid the right pair of jeans or whatever it was so that they would fit in. You know what it's like when somebody's mean to your kid. I mean, it crushes us when we can't buy our kids a goldfish or something. But can you imagine literally watching your children die in front of you because you couldn't feed them, or because you couldn't get clean water for them, or because you couldn't get them medical care? Can you imagine the hopelessness of a parent watching that happen and feeling completely powerless to do anything about it? Can you imagine how hard it would be to hold on your faith in Jesus when the Bible tells us that Jesus came to give us rich, satisfying, abundant life? Can you imagine how hard it is to hold on to that faith when the only life you see is this life with children suffering and dying all around you? To me, that is heartbreaking. And my prayer today is that he'll break your hearts too. And he will open your eyes to these people that Jesus calls his brothers and sisters, and that by his leading and by his calling and by his choosing and by his Spirit inside of you and the power that he gives us, that we will make a difference in these lives and in their futures. So today we are going to do something unprecedented. We as a church are going to sponsor a whole region in Kenya called Mwala. This is about 35,000 people, about the same size as Bulverde Spring Branch, 35,000 people. And we're going to need a partner to do that. And so we're going to be using World Vision as our partner to accomplish this incredible thing that God's calling us to do. Now, I know that some of you may have reservations about dealing with these huge, international, global organizations like World Vision. I did. I had reservations. They're sitting right over here, so you guys don't listen to this, okay? I had reservations because I've heard the same stuff you've heard about these great big global companies, right? Compassion International, World Vision, Samaritan's Purse, these huge multinational groups. I heard the same stuff you've heard. I've heard that they weren't even Christian. I've heard, they do a lot of good work, but it's not being done in Jesus' name. In fact, if you go to one of their places, you're just as likely to be handed a Quran as you are a Bible. I heard that. I've heard that they're not good stewards of the money. I've heard that they waste all their donations on ridiculous salaries for their CEOs and Ferraris for their executives and Learjets and whining and dining people, and none of the money actually gets through to the kids.